Formula One's budget cap is putting the top F1 teams under more pressure than ever before. With the new aero regulations, the teams are in a development race which is adding more strain to the already limited budgets. But could teams really run out of money, and do they really need the FIA to increase the limit? Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. The story of budgets in 2022 has been fascinating to watch. This year is really the first time where the teams have been balancing this season and next with a more limited budget cap than last year. Despite this, it seems like the top teams in particular are struggling to keep their costs down, which is in part due to the relentless developments, but is also worsened by inflation, with freight in particular costing up to 4 times more than previous years. The budget problem. The most vocal team up to this point in the season when it comes to their budget cap has been Christian Horner and Red Bull. He declared that potentially 7 teams on the grid may not be able to make it to the end of the season if there isn't a change to the cap. At the same time, he's claimed that the FIA has a duty of care to increase the budget due to the unexpectedly high inflation rates that everyone's facing right now. To declare that 7 of the 10 teams could be struggling with the limit is a bold call. I can't imagine some of these teams enjoyed being spoken on behalf of. But if the claims are correct, the prospect of teams not making it to the races towards the end of the season due to the constraints is not what you want to hear, and it could really damage the reputation of the sport. It's also not the reason the budget cap was brought in the first place, as it was instead done to control the spending of the larger teams in particular. The fascinating thing about this setup, though, is that the teams that have previously had the larger budgets, such as Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes, were obviously more impacted by the changes, and in fact, there were even some teams that weren't affected at all. It's hardly a surprise then that along with Red Bull, those other 2 top teams have also been vocal about the budget cap struggles and agreeing with the Red Bull team. But the introduction of the cap was a criteria in the latest Concord agreement that all teams agreed to, so there was a recognition that controlling the costs would be a good thing for all competitors. The first season with the budget cap was last year, when the teams had carried forward the same cars from 2020, albeit with minor regulation changes and a token system. Once the season got underway, they had little incentive to invest in too many car developments, considering the majority of their budget would be spent on the new regulations for this year. So while the budget cap was in place, there was less pressure on the teams when it came to developing their car quickly, which is something that has changed significantly for 2022. With the new regulations, the teams are learning quickly, and the marginal gains from car developments early on can be the difference between winning and not winning the championship. So understandably, the likes of Red Bull and Mercedes seem to have been bringing updates as frequently as possible to make sure they can remain or become competitive. This is nothing new, but the budget cap adds a new complication. For example, many of the cars at the beginning of the season were overweight. This is a normal situation to be in as the new parts are in the early design specification, and as they get developed further, they can be designed to be lighter. However, whilst in a pre-budget capped era the teams might dedicate teams to reduce the weight of their designs, this year that is less likely to be the case. Instead, as the new specifications of parts are designed to be better aerodynamically, they're also able to be reduced in weight. So the weight saving has become a bit of a byproduct of development. These types of changes will have been made across the board, with many other efficiencies being found, and it's the largest setups that will have faced the biggest challenge in the first place, but it was probably better for the competitiveness of the sport as a whole. Before we take a look at whether these budget problems are really something to worry about, I want to take a moment to ask you to consider subscribing to Behind the Drive. According to my YouTube statistics, just 20% of the people watching my videos in May were subscribed to my channel, and I'm aiming to get to 50,000 by the summer break. So if you haven't already, please do consider subscribing. Thanks. Is this really something to worry about? So we've seen the problem that some teams are facing, but is this really something to worry about? Well, this is where this topic for me gets really interesting. Christian Horner claims the FIA is looking into the problem, but when asked, some of the other team principals don't share Horner's opinion when it comes to the cap being lifted. Take Otmar Schaffenauer, for example, who's in charge of Alpine. He commented that when the Alpine team set their budgets, it was December last year, when the UK's RPI was already at 7%. So there were already signs of inflation on the horizon, hence the team were able to see some of the challenge they could be facing. It's also fair to assume that these teams will have multiple models with various rates of inflation over the season, so they could see a best or worst case scenario, for example. But Schaffenauer added that the Alpine team is under budget, and is actually on track to meet it at the moment, so they would be opposed to any particular changes mid-season. What this shows is that if push comes to shove, the teams can meet the cap this year despite the inflation rate, but this leads nicely onto another viewpoint. After the Miami Grand Prix, Ferrari declared that they don't believe that Red Bull could maintain the development trend that they'd seen so far this season based on their estimated costs of developing the parts and producing them. It's true that Red Bull has been the best so far when it comes to developing their car at the sharp end of the grid at least, and as a result, they now lead both world championships and probably have the fastest car when it comes to the races. But the question is, at what cost? Ferrari believe it isn't possible for Red Bull to maintain this progress, and you can see how the Ferrari approach is so different. Instead of bringing updates often, they waited until Barcelona to bring a whole update package, which is perhaps a more risky but cost-efficient approach, as the parts may take longer to understand if there are so many changes and the practice sessions are still so short. What's clear is that the most successful team in F1 history believe that this is the best and most cost-efficient approach, so it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out over the rest of the season. So with the fact that it is Red Bull that is being the most vocal team regarding the budget cap, and then the Ferrari suspicions that their rivals are overspending earlier on in the year, it suggests that this could be more of a Red Bull focused problem more than any other team. Perhaps the developments have got ahead of Red Bull, and only once they look back at the finances did they realise they were heading for a cliff and might not be able to keep up this pace or even finish the 2022 season. I think the best summary of the problem for me was the solution that Fred Vasseur, the team principal at Alfa Romeo, suggested, and that was simply to switch off the wind tunnel and stop bringing updates every weekend. I think this is an excellent suggestion, and a great point regarding the fact that the teams that seem to be bringing the most updates are indeed the ones concerned about this budget cap. My verdict. I find it hard to believe that teams won't be able to make it to the end of the season because of the budget cap. I believe that the teams will be forced to listen to Vasseur and curtail their spending. At the same time, I appreciate that the world's in a difficult place right now and inflation is causing prices to go up everywhere. But as Safnauer said, it wasn't a complete unknown when these budgets were planned. Given the comments from many other team principals on the grid in response to the top 3 team suggestions, I find it hard to believe that the FIA could get the votes required to increase the budget cap further. Other team bosses such as Gunther Steiner have also spoken out against the suggestions of an increase. So it's difficult to believe that the top teams that want this change will get their way. So it will be either a case of stop developing and make the end of the season, or continue developing and not make the final races. I know which option I'd pick, although wouldn't it be fun to see a race without the top 3 teams?